Hi guys, this is Mujtaba Ahmad and I am back with another interesting video lecture for the syllabus O Levels Biology 5090, and the topic today that we are going to be discussing is classification. But before that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what you see on your screens right now. And you see two pictures that have been divided, and on the top side you see different varieties of cheese, I guess. So cheese products are displayed in a super mall. Then on the downside you see different vegetables, different sorts of capsicum, I guess, red colored, green colored, yellow colored, and cucumbers that are arranged in an orderly manner. What I want to make out of this is that we often go for grocery shopping or for any other buying any other product, and we see that in big super malls or in very established super malls or even smaller ones, the retailers or the shopkeepers have arranged products, and that stays the same for the time every time you visit the place. It turns out that there's a reason, or definitely there's a reason for everything, and the reason for this is definitely that it makes it easier for us, for the consumers, to buy a product or to get immediately to what they are looking for. And I just wanted to stress upon this, that in our everyday lives we observe this phenomenon of classification, but I'd like to really talk strictly about classification in terms of biological studies in biology. Biologists who often are researchers who often identify different living organisms, they have to name them, they have to classify them based upon their phenotype, that is how they look physically, or their different characters, phylogenetic profiles, and they have to label them a proper name. How they do this is absolutely important to learn, and that's what we are going to study in this video lecture. So let me ask you some questions. Classification matters? Definitely it does. So naming living organisms particularly in a standard manner, so there has to be everything in a standardized or in an orderly, strictly orderly manner in scientific enterprise, for especially so that different people or different researchers or group of scientists that are working on, say, same species or same living organism, they have to communicate. Definitely science progresses when we communicate, when we publish our findings. So there has to be a set standard that should be followed everywhere in every corner of the world to name or assign a label or categorize a living organism. So that's what we are going to study in this lecture. So as always, I'd like to take you through the learning outcomes. So the first point is that understand that organisms can be classified into groups by the feature they share. So definitely the classification obviously rests upon or is based upon the physical features that are definitely important in that part. Describe a species as a group of organisms that can reproduce to produce fertile offspring. It is important that we understand the definition of species, because species is something that we are going to be using again and again in this topic, as well as in our higher studies as well. So we are going to discuss a little bit about a species and its definition as well. So then we will be discussing shortly the important part, that's the binomial system, the binomial nomenclature, that has been an internationally agreed upon system of assigning names to living organism that consists of two parts, genus and its species name. And then we will take a look at the dichotomous key. What's a dichotomous key? And we'll learn how to construct a dichotomous key based upon the identifiable features of different living organisms. So definitely we are going to say how scientists or how researchers group living organisms to identify them. So what we are going to see now is a little bit introduction or a background of this topic. Introduction and significance. So what's the significance of learning this? as we know that all organisms, they do share some particular characteristics. So for example, animals, they have backbone, they are called vertebrates. Mammals, they share certain characteristics that allows them, or that enables scientists especially, to categorize them as mammals, for example. So organisms within each group are then further divided into smaller groups. These smaller groups are based on more detailed similarities within each larger group. So what happens is that there are larger groups, and then these smaller groups which constitute which are formed from, which come from these larger groups, are categorized on more narrower perspective, so to say, and they are categorized on more detailed similarities. So they give you a greater insight into what an organism belongs to, and really. And then we're going to be discussing this grouping. So this, what it have, so the rationale behind this is definitely that it makes it easier for scientists to study certain groups of organisms. As I said, that in scientific enterprise, it's not just finding things and making discoveries. It is absolutely important for us scientists, for researchers, so to say, to be able to publish their findings and to communicate. And so that's absolutely important for scientists to classify organisms, and that's the way we are going to learn how they classify them. Then we see that characteristics such as appearance, reproduction, mobility and functionality are just a few ways in which living organisms are grouped together. So basically every living organism have these sorts of characteristics, such as reproduction, mobility. Animals are mobile, and functionality, they have some specific structure, and their function is related to their functioning, as we saw in our last lecture as well. This is just an example, just to stress the importance of this in scientific endeavors, that the Australian Museum specializes in taxonomic and systematic research. So there's this is a great museum that's been devoted to finding out the taxonomy and conducting systematic research into and findings into living organisms and classifying them, plants or animals. So this type of research is essential for environmental assessments. It forms the basic building blocks of study of nature and is a key science on which many others depend. So it is important that we gauge how we are utilizing environment, how we are finding, or how or for example, or are we near to making a species or a living organism extinct. It is important so for us to understand and to communicate these scientific names and scientific names of these organisms. So what is a species? We've been talking about this now a lot. So a biological species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another in nature. It is important to understand that, and produce fertile offspring. So guys, it is absolutely important that you understand that species is an isolated, say, family of living organisms that when mate or when reproduce, they are able to reproduce a really fertile offspring. So for example, a horse can mate with a donkey, but it produces a mule, which is mostly, in most of the cases, it is infertile because of abnormal number of chromosomes. It can then not propagate its DNA, or it cannot reproduce properly. So mule is although horse and donkey can mate, but they do not come from a single species, because they mate to produce an infertile offspring, that's mule. That's what I wanted to communicate. Species are characterized by the fact that they are reproductively isolated from other groups, which means that organisms in one species are incapable of reproducing with organisms in another species. So our example of horse and donkey makes more sense now, because horse can mate with other horse or the female horses, but not with donkey. Although it can mate with donkey, but it can then not produce a fertile offspring, which is important for this definition of species. So therefore Species, this is important, they are reproductively isolated from other groups. So guys, this is not this is to be noted in this definition. Then we are going to look at binomial system. So what's binomial? Bi means two, nomial means naming systems, nomenclature. Nomenclature. So it's a two-part naming system, so to say, in simple terms. It is essential to integrate the naming system across life sciences. As I said, that every day new species or new living organisms are being identified, and it is important that there be set standards for scientists to follow across the world, or across from people from different languages. So this helps especially taxonomists. Taxonomists are those who study this family of, or families of living organisms, the kingdoms and the species, to what exactly they belong to. So the scientific name of species that is set by nomenclature entails two parts, as I said in the beginning: a generic name, which is the name of its genus, and then a specific epithet. In this regard, the scientific name is also referred to as binomial name. So the founding father of this branch of biology, that is taxonomy, was Carl Linnaeus, and the method, he wrote a paper or so, a small journal, and then he published this, which later became a massive hit because it was an indispensable tool or indispensable finding for scientific community. As I said, they have to communicate or publish their findings. So he was the first one who formalized the binomial nomenclature as the modern name system of naming organism. He designed the system so as to differentiate species from one to the other. So it entails that one species has to be different from the other, and that helps biologists to carry on different model studies. As we know that model organisms are utilized to study various cellular mechanisms or biological systems in a better way. So it is important for scientists to be able to differentiate or identify a different species, or identify one species from another. So binomial nomenclature proved to be essential in the scientific community. As I told you, through this system, taxonomists from all over the world can identify species in unison. So it definitely removes the confusion or any you can say misunderstanding that might arise as far as the naming of a living organism, or naming of a newly identified species is considered, because that's the set standard that's to be followed. So I am going to give a couple of examples that will make this concept more meaningful to you. An example is Yucca filamentosa, a plant of the Yucca genus, and the unique filamentosa species. What you are reading on slide is this. So when applying the binomial nomenclature system, the name of the species is written in italics or enclosed within the quotation marks. So it is important that you know that it is written in italics or enclosed with quotation marks. So it is easier for students to enclose in quotation marks, because then it might cause discrepancy when you write this in your manuscript or in your exam papers. So this is to be followed, guys. This is strictly to be followed, because little things do make great sense in science. The genus name begins in capital letter, whereas a specific epithet in small letter. The genus may also be written by abbreviating it to its initial letter. For instance, based on the previous example, Yucca filamentosa abbreviated to Y. filamentosa. So Y is the genus that has been abbreviated, Y. And then in italics it follows the specific epithet. The name given to a particular species is called binomial name, or its scientific name, because it's composed of two things. So you have to understand that this one is its genus, and Malleus it's its specific epithet that's only unique to apple, Pyrus Malleus, Musa paradisium, and then Camelus camelidae, it's the scientific name of camel. So all over the world, if you say this thing, people will identify it definitely, it's a camel, or whatever they call it in their own local language. So you understand that this removes any sort of discrepancy or misunderstanding that might arise as far as the identification of a living organism is considered. So now we come on to an interesting thing, which is dichotomous key. We have been talking about classification. Now what tool, there must be a tool to label or to identify these living organisms. So one of these tools is a dichotomous key, which is used widely in scientific enterprise to identify or classify objects, for example people, animals, plants, bacteria, etc. And they help categorize these living organisms based upon their physical, so based upon their qualitative as well as quantitative traits that are easily visible and then identifiable in the most straightforward manner. So it's the most commonly used form of classification or type of identification key used in biology, as it simplifies identifying unknown organisms. Simply put, it is a method used to identify a species by answering a series of questions. So it's really like you are solving some sort of riddle. I take it that way, and it makes really enjoyable experience. So think of it as a riddle. Someone is asking you questions, and then you are answering and keep on answering until and unless you reach a point that you definitely identify, or you get to the answer and are able to identify the question, or the answer to a particular question. So it's based on contrasting physical contrasting features. They could be physical features and that have two possible outcomes. So it's important that you understand that it comprises of two possible outcomes. So for example, if a living organism has, say, 2 legs or not, yes or not. If it has 2 legs, then it does it have fur, yes or not. So yes or no questions could be an example of these two so there have to be two possible outcomes to your question. So and we'll see this, and it would make more sense in the coming slide as well, that how we can have two possible outcomes. So dichotomous means divided into two parts, hence the dichotomous keys always present two choices based on the characteristics of the organism in each step. So that this is what I was mentioning, and I'll show you this just now in a moment. So what happens is that by correctly identifying or answering the questions that are being posed to you or that are being asked to you, you are getting nearer to or you are narrowing you're narrowing the choices that are available to you, and are able to identify precisely the living organism that's in context or that's being talked about. So you have to understand that when we create a dichotomous key, both the qualitatives, for example the color of fur, the color of fur is one example of a qualitative. The type of fur, we can say, or the contrasting qualitative characteristics are, and then quantitative characters, the number of legs, for example, its height, are the factors that are considered. Then it can be done both in a graphical, so for example a flowchart form, or a written form as well. So written format would be maybe that's an easy way to present this one on paper. So most often they are used to identify plant and animal species, although it can be used to classify any object that can be identified by a set of observable characteristics. So that's a good thing that you can utilize this knowledge in any other subject as well. So if you have two contrasting, or if you have many objects that have visible differences, then you can categorize them and then you can identify them easily by making this flowchart diagram or table chart. So the first point, I'm going to take you through the steps. So the first step is to list down the characteristics. Look for the visible characteristics, both the qualitative and the quantitative ones, in your given sample. For example, you see for the color of fur, you see how an organism looks. Any qualitative character that you can identify, you must list it down. And then also quantitative character, does your animal, for example if you're talking about animal, does your animal have a tail, does it have horns, how many pairs of legs are there, questions or points of such sort that you need to pay attention to in this point. And then you are going to organize the characteristics in order. So it's important that you organize your information in order, because then that's what really will help you make a dichotomous key. Then you are going to divide your specimens. So specimens must be divided based upon their distinctive characters. So for say, if that's a mammal or if it's a bird, then you should divide it as you go on to making or constructing this key. Then divide the specimen even further. For example, this is an important point to understand. So for example, if you say that it has fur, then that's clear, it has fur, then it's a mammal. And then if you for example, if you say that it does not have fur, then ask another question, does it have feathers? If yes, then it's a bird. If no, then ask another question, does it have dry skin? If yes, then say reptile. If no, what could be another chance, or what could be another point that could make you understand better about or identify this living organism? Then you can ask another question, does it have scales? So if it has scales, then it's a fish. If it has no scales, then it's an amphibian. So you see that it's a sequential manner of questioning. So you have to understand that the most general forms of questions are to be asked at the beginning. Then you are going to narrow down as you go down the pyramid or down the hill, so to say. You are narrowing your choices, so to identify better or precisely a living organism. Then draw a dichotomous key diagram and test it out. So guys, it's important that you test it out. Try it with your friends or colleagues, your classmates, with teacher, and see if they are able to successfully identify the living organism that's been asked or that's been referred to in context. So guys, this was all about classification. We have learned about how important it is to classify. Then we learned about the binomial nomenclature system, which was first formalized by Carl Linnaeus, and it comprises of two things, the genus name and the specific epithet of an organism that's particular to that very living organism all around the globe. And then we saw that how scientists can classify living organisms. Dichotomous key is one of the most straightforward and simplest methods that is utilized in classification of living organisms, and we just ended up discussing how we can construct a dichotomous key. And interestingly, dichotomous key can be applied to anything, to any subject. It's knowledge that can be definitely applied to different subjects. So all you have to understand is that you have to identify visible different features or characteristics, and then you can label them, or you can categorize them in sequential order by asking questions, and then helping the other person to identify what you mean, so by asking different questions. So this is an example to help you understand. I hope that you really like this lecture, and I hope that I have been able to deliver this in a fair manner. I have listed the sources that I have utilized. You can also visit them as well. I have taken the knowledge from there and read these the texts, and then able to present this, and then try to present this to you. So I hope that it was helpful for you. Till next time, take care. Thank you so much.